I showed you in the last video how abominations used to have this ability called Abomination Explosion, but another thing about abominations was that they had attack sounds, much like the Pandaren Brewmaster and Beastmaster later would. These sound files are called Hero Abomination, which is interesting. Apparently they were among the undead heroes to hire instead of normal units. The hero units that did end up in the game have a lot of interesting changes found in the beta. The Death Knight used to have this ability called Finger of Death. I'm not sure if it was similar to the existing Finger of Death ability or not, but there's no way to really know. Liches used to have a whole set of different abilities. Check this assortment out. This one has the curse icon, but it's called Disenchant, just like on WoW. And it has a spell cry associated with it.
Clear.
This Frost Nova one here is called Glacier in the files, and it was more like the Frost Nova in WoW, blasting units in a radius around the Lich instead of a target location.
Freeze.
And of course Frost Armor.
Nezul, protect them.
And it turns out their original ultimate ability was to summon a Frost Worm, which by the way used to look way different, and somehow creepier without wings. That may be why Frost Worms still have a birth animation attached to their models in the game.
Rise from your grave.
The Cryptlord's Spiked Carapace ability, originally called Thorn Shield, used to be one that you could turn on and off rather than a passive ability. I agree with the ultimate incarnation of the ability, in that having the spikes out draining mana makes the ability pretty bad. Dreadlords are very different in previous iterations of Warcraft 3. They looked a lot more feminine in appearance and were much more vampire themed. They had this ability called Gather Shadows, unknown purpose. This ability called Charm, very vampire-like, and whatever this ability is. Possibly a variant on Sleep, but it's an ultimate ability, so I really have no idea. Also, thanks to some beta sound files, we know that Dreadlords could transform into a bat, or possibly a cloud of bats. Take a listen to these voice files. Also, I'm not sure when it replaced this ultimate ability, but Inferno used to have a much cooler sound file. Necromancers used to have spell cries as well, for Raise Dead,
Awaken,
and an ability that was taken out of the game, Corpse Explosion.
bloody corpses.
This ability was also found on the Diablo games, and later as a Death Knight ability in Wrath of the Lich King. I'm guessing it was taken out of the game due to either glitch or balance concerns. I also think it's interesting that there appears to be two types of Raise Dead spells. Maybe you could choose between summoning skeletons and skeleton archers. Necromancers also have this ULD. For those who are just joining me on the series, ULD refers to an unused line of dialogue.
Our brethren is under attack.
Grammar, Necromancers. Grammar. Last on our list of spell cries for the undead is the Crypt Fiend, who apparently used to have an ability to summon bugs, probably like the Crypt Lord later did, called Summon Vile Insects.
Rise.
From old tooltips and this icon here, we learn that meat wagons were originally created only to collect corpses. You had to research this technology, called Metapult, in order to give them the ability to attack. I also wouldn't be surprised if the wagons actually flung corpses they picked up rather than having unlimited ammunition, but that would have put the undead behind in terms of siege damage. There are quite a few unused undead ability icons, which I'm not sure where they belong in the current or past technology tree. Aura of Darkness, Regeneration Aura, an upgrade for Regeneration Aura, Lament, Shadow Pact, and Requiem, which was apparently an autocast spell. There are some odd building differences as well. This is the icon for that Gargoyle Spire building I told you about, and these three icons are called Ziggurat. Perhaps the actual Necropolis Town Hall building was called a Ziggurat, rather than the actual farms, but then again, Necromancers have this ULD.
Raise more ziggurats.
So maybe the Ziggurat farms actually had 3 stages of upgrade in the past? This icon is called Spirit Tower, but in another place it's called a Merger. Remember how merging ghouls used to be the way to create abominations? I'm guessing this was the building where it happened. Possibly like acolytes get sacrificed to make shades. Who knows? Oh, and speaking of sacrifice, here's an unused glowing version of the sacrifice ability icon. And there's the Obsidian Destroyer, who has this icon that calls them Obsidian Avengers. They seem to have a different look originally than this horrifying monstrosity. And their Orb of Annihilation ability is called Orb of Death on the icon. Oh, and yeah, this non-autocast icon is in the game, so you can use it on your maps if you want. And then, last of all, there's this. Man, it bugs me that this was left out of the game. The ultimate icon for a haunted gold mine was left just the same as a normal gold mine. But they had this one all along. Why did it get left out? Oh yeah, and the files have a name for an item called Kel'Thuzad's Heart. Maybe he transported his heart in the urn of King Taranis instead of all his remains? I don't know. Secret spell models intermission! Here are some interesting spell and buff models that are still in the game's files. Feel free to type in their paths on your own custom units and spells and be creative with them.
ancients!
I already showed you this icon last video of the Moon Priestess riding an owl. None of the heroes have anything else interesting icon-wise except for this icon called Archdruid. My guess is that Keepers of the Grove originally used a model closer to that of Malfurion. However, the heroes do have quite a few spell cries. Keeper of the Grove has these ones for Entangling Roots, originally called Stranglevines.
This should weed out a few.
Thorns.
You mess with the branch, you get the thorns.
And Tranquility.
The calm before the storm.
As well as an ability called Nature Touch, which has my favorite spell cry ever.
Everything I touch dies or comes back to life.
Wait, what? Yeah, I don't think any sentence in Warcraft games has stumped me more than that one. The Ironwood branch icon seems to have been used for this Nature Touch ability, as well as this one here. Best I can imagine is that it was some kind of ability that healed allies and did damage to enemies? I don't know. Let's hear that masterpiece one more time, though.
Everything I touch dies or comes back to life.
It's interesting that Thorn's aura even has a spell cry. Perhaps originally it was a granted ability like Frost Armor instead of a passive aura, or you could turn it on or off. Demon Hunters have these sounds which indicate they had an entirely different array of abilities originally. These abilities are called Mind Lock,
You are spellbound.
Soul Siphon,
Your soul is mine.
and Spectral Sight.
Hide no longer.
Judging by the audio files, I'm guessing they were some kind of stunning, life-stealing, and invisibility-seeing abilities respectively. Metamorphosis also had a spell cry.
Time to raise hell.
Going back to the Priestess of the Moon, she actually has 5 spell cries, most of which aren't even for the abilities she now has. I don't know if the developers originally just had a hard time choosing between a bunch of abilities or what, but listen to all these and we'll speculate on what abilities they were. Moonglow.
Goddess, grant me sight.
Probably the original alternate to Scout. Possibly just a vision spell or a spell that increased her line of sight for a time? Or maybe even a temporary ultravision spell. Moon Reflection.
Let me bounce this off you.
Apparently a spell that bounced between targets like a moonglaive, but in a magical sort of way. Searing Light.
High beams on.
Oh, these puns, I tell you what. Some kind of damaging light beam attack, I'm guessing. True Shot.
Shoot to kill.
Obviously her original True Shot aura, except possibly single cast like earlier examples we've seen. And last of all, Twilight.
Darkness falls across the land.
Whoops, wrong sound file.
Darkness falls across the land.
There we go. Some kind of blinding ability, perhaps? A fog of war increasing spell across the map? Who knows? The heroes aren't the only ones with spell cries. Druids of the Claw would say this when they transformed.
Things are about to get grisly.
This will be grisly.
And they had a spell called Hibernation,
Sleep and be healed.
which ostensibly put the druid to sleep and increased his health generation for a time. And last of all, the Dryads, which apparently had an ability called Weakness.
This might sting a little.
If you ever tried to make a quest in the triggers in the original Reign of Chaos editor, you would have quickly found out that the icon for Shadow Meld is called Ambush in the files. I assume maybe it was an actual ability used to go invisible and then strike, kind of like Windwalk, but either way, this was the original icon for the Shadow Meld at Night ability. Wisps used to have a blue icon instead of their yellow-green one, which I think looks a lot better. And they used to have their own Can't Build There and Job's Done sound effects, rather than having an archer say it for them. Many of the Ancients' icons have interesting names that differ from their later versions. Ancients of War used to be called Ancients of Earth, Ancients of Wind used to be called Ancients of the Moon, Ancient Protectors used to be called Treants, and this icon is called Ancient of the Wild, though I'm not sure what it depicts. Possibly what would eventually become the Ancient of Wonders. There's also this icon called Den of Wonders, suggesting that the original Night Elf shop in Frozen Throne would be a constructed building rather than an ancient. And I've already talked about the Bear Den icon. It turns out that the Night Elf fishing village has an icon as well. It appears they also took out the Entangled Gold Mine icon from use in the game. This makes me think it must have been an intentional choice and not an oversight to exclusively use the plain gold mine icon. Possibly to make it easier to spot the icon when you're trying to secure a gold mine in the game regardless of what race you are. As unused units go, there's an icon for the Reign of Chaos Warden Assassin unit where she appears to be less shadowy in appearance. She even has a leafy cloak on. Her icon's called Avenging Assassin. Speaking of wardens, there's this icon called Vengeance Incarnate, which I assume was the original icon for the Vengeance ability. It looks pretty cool to me. Not sure why they changed it to this weird green one. There's actually a passive version of this new Vengeance icon. Maybe it had a completely different effect in its first draft. Roar also has a passive icon in the game's files for some reason. Other unused ability icons are this one called Poison Arrow, which may have been a variation of the slow poison ability for Dryads, or maybe it was an icon for the weakness ability they had. This icon's still in the game and it's called Bark Skin. It even has a sound effect. And a buff effect. No idea what it did, but I'm guessing it raised defense. It must have been taken out at the last minute. This was the original icon for searing arrows, called instead flaming arrows. You know how ballistas used to have the ability impaling bolt? There are two icons for that. This one, and this seemingly unfinished one. And this icon is the one that was originally for Force of Nature. Or maybe it was called Force of Nature but did something different from summoning treants, because it matches the style of the transformation abilities of druids. Is it a picture of a parrot or something? Maybe it was an ability where archdruids could transform into owlbears. WoW druid players will recognize this icon, which is called Regeneration. Probably the original icon for Rejuvenation. And the icons for Mark of the Claw and Mark of the Talon were called Enchanted Crows and Enchanted Bears. This icon's called Mana Recharge, meaning perhaps Moonwells, or Moon Pools originally, just regenerated mana in earlier versions of the game. There's also evidence that wisps may have been healers, both for buildings and for units. And last but not least, the icon for the Night Elf battleship was called a Night Elf
Battle Cruiser.
For the Dragon Queen!
One of the interesting things that exists in the game only as icons is the idea of exchanging resources, sort of like the markets in the Age of Empires series. They were the predictable exchanging gold for lumber and vice versa, named GL Exchange and LG Exchange, but there are also two other icons that are interestingly named, GM Exchange and MG Exchange. What does the M stand for that's being exchanged for gold? Well, probably a resource called Mana Stones. I couldn't find much information about Mana Stones, but in the German magazine GameStar in 2001, the following excerpt shed some light on the subject. Exchange stones for heroes. On the large maps, you'll often encounter neutral creatures like kobolds from which you can get Mana Stones in combat. That's the only way to recruit heroes beyond the given limit. Each of these heroes can handle up to 4 spells. Besides the 3 common spells like healing or a fireball, they learn mightier class-specific spells from level 6 on. For example, the Mountain King of the Alliance can summon a gold mine. For the Mana Stones, you can buy not only abilities, but also items, of which each hero can hold up to 4. These can be simple potions, but also items like intelligence increasing crowns. Some utilities only work during certain times of day. There are a lot of interesting claims in this passage, not least of which are the terms class-specific and recruiting heroes beyond the given limit, but there's very little more about this online, at least that I could find. Judging from screenshots like this one, stones were an actual resource that you kept track of, possibly instead of lumber. I think it's funny that despite the mechanic being worked on, the icon itself ended up being the icon for the health stone, not the mana stone that ended up in the game. This screenshot from the beta may depict one of the original mana stones as they appear before you pick them up. These sorts of exchanges apparently took place in a building called a Thieves Guild, which I can only assume is a neutral building like the Goblin Merchant. There doesn't seem to be a Thieves Guild model in the game, but there is an old icon for it, and a sound effect. There are also icons for hire and sell, making me think that maybe mercenary camps and merchants had actual menus you could navigate through to hire or buy what you wanted. Speaking of Goblin Merchants, I'm not sure why this changed, but originally Goblin Merchants used to have more voice lines with sounds for hello, goodbye, and pissed or annoyed from being clicked on too many times. Perhaps this was later limited by buildings only having one sound effect each. There are also a couple of spell cries for the Goblin Zeppelin. Check these out.
Hop on! All full!
Of all the unused sounds, I definitely think these should have stayed in the game. First, some unused icons. This icon is called Chime, and besides reminding me of summoning Gozrilla from the Zul'Farrak dungeon, I'm not sure what it would have done in Warcraft 3, or even if it was an item, an ability, or something different altogether. This icon, Drain, seems to combine the effects of draining both health and mana, which is interesting. Here's an early icon of a Wendigo that indicated a much more different model. This ability has an on and off form and is called Quill Spray. The tooltip suggests it's for the Beastmaster's Quill Beast, but I can't find any unit in the game that uses it. I may be wrong, but the ability itself works fine, and this icon here is called Invulnerable. Perhaps more interesting still are icons that are in the game today but have different names. I could read them all out to you, but I'll spare the time and just show you. This one's actually used once in the game during Rexar's campaign to symbolize a report of the dying grunt at the beginning, but its icon file name is Spy. Apparently there was once an ability to do some kind of espionage on the other team, possibly another Thieves Guild ability to gain the line of sight of your enemies. There are a number of unused item icons in the game. A bunch of them are weapons, whose icons later were used in WoW, but there are some that could have had magical origins, like this silver ring, crown, golden sword, and flame sword. Others are still in the game but are unused and their purposes are lost to time. This lamp, this orb that I think would be later used in the Dark Moon Fair, this acorn, these 2 crate icons, a bronze bowl with both empty and full states, a vial of holy water, and this Hearthstone, which has the file name of Pebble. I'm not sure if this is the same one, but there is mention in the beta files of a Medusa Pebble, which would turn the target enemy non-hero unit into stone when used. A unit turned to stone by the Medusa Pebble is removed from the game permanently. There's also an item for the Skull of Gul'dan. Originally, it was an item that Illidan needed to pick up and perform some sort of ritual on, rather than destroy a giant floating shrine thingy. While we're on the topic of items, did you know there's a pick up item icon in the game's files? I have no idea who thought that picking up an item needed a button all its own. Besides unused and discarded icons, we can learn a bit of interesting information from what some of the existing item icons are called. A lot of the icons were originally called after their appearance, likely just done by the artists and left for the designers to figure out mechanics for later. For example, there are these potions, tomes, and rings named after their colors, including an unused blue potion. There are also a few with very simple descriptions like Scroll, Skull Ring, Jade Falcon Ring, and Panda Manual, some with the name Snazzy on them, and some names for items that actually changed over time. For example, this used to be the Scroll of Town Portal rather than this one. This was originally just called Scroll Uber. These scrolls were also switched around later on. As for Easter eggs in the existing items you already know of, check this out. The Scepter of Mastery is actually a scepter with the letters SD on the head, a clear reference to its artist, Samwise Didier. And I never noticed this until now, but check out the Potion of Invisibility. The glass around it is invisible. Ha! And last of all, the temporary icon, if an icon's path is broken or undefined in the game, is a picture of Sam Didier.
Secret missiles finale.
To finish off, here are a few missile models that are still in the game. Simply change the projectile art field to one of these and you can use them in your own custom maps. This is the original Ballista missile from Reign of Chaos if you don't want the kinda weird glaive throwers in your map. Similarly, here's a flaming catapult shot so that the burning oil upgrade isn't limited to just demolisher projectiles. Here's, well, the way Storm, Earth, and Fire works is that it shoots a few panda missiles flipping through the air. So you can have a panda pult if you want. There isn't a fire projectile, just Storm and Earth. I love this projectile. It was available in the Reign of Chaos editor, but disappeared when the Frozen Throne came out. Luckily, it's still available, if hidden. I just think it looks a little better than the existing searing arrows in the game, which look more like light arrows to me. Remember this icon I mentioned in the Night Elf section? I'm guessing it was paired with these. Now this is neat. Some kind of steam ball attack, very similar to the existing fire and frost missiles in the game. Looks pretty awesome when assigned to a dragon's attack. And lastly, there's this missile called Treant Missile. I think it looks kind of like a lurker or sunken colony attack from StarCraft. A lot of potential in this one here. Well, folks, that is all. Sorry if this episode was a bit scattered. That was a lot of unrelated content to tie together. I'm going to be releasing one more addendum to catch a few that I missed in the past couple years, but after that, I'm not sure there's much left to say. Sounds and dialogue, maybe? As always, thanks for watching and pointing out new Easter eggs of your own. I will see you next time.